Hello class, and welcome to the second video lecture for week 2 of CINS 129. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about classes and objects. We're also going to do some math and talk about the different math operations that you can do within C#. And then we're going to look at how all of this applies to this week's assignment. The first topic that we're going to cover is classes and objects. A lot of times you'll hear people talk about these two items in programming almost interchangeably, but there is a distinct difference between a class and an object. Object is really it's what object-oriented programming, it's what the name is based on. So it's in a very important part of C# programming, and it's important that you understand the difference between a class and an object. A class is a definition of an object. A object is the actual initialized class. You can think of the class part of this equation as really just a definition of an item, whereas an object is the actual tangible item. It's something that you can touch. For example, if you look at your screen, you can see I have created a class called car. Within that class, I've given it several different attributes. I've said a car has a brand, it has a model, and it has a maximum speed. This just defines what a car is. It isn't an actual car. As you can see, I don't have brand equals anything, or I haven't set model equal to anything in this class. This is just the definition of what a car is. Up here in the main program, I actually have defined what those things are. You can see my first line here, I've created a variable of my car, and in the previous video and up till now, you would have assumed that I was using a type here to say the type is my car. And type, the keyword type can still be used here, but really what you're doing is you're defining what class to use. When you really get down to it, types are just classes as well, but that's later on down the road. We'll talk more about that. So what we've done is we've used the keyword car, which is what I've created down here, to say I want to create a variable called my car. Now, whenever you're implementing a new object, whenever you're creating a new object, you have to initialize the object. And in C#, the nomenclature for doing that is to say new car, and then you're actually calling a special method on that class that's called the constructor. We're not going to go into that in this class, in this video. We will get into that in a few chapters and talk about what constructors are and how they work. For now, just accept that when you create a new object, you have to say car, my car equals new car, and accept the fact that that's the nomenclature that you have to use to initialize the object. Once you've done that, you can have access to the variables that I created down here on that my car, or on that car class. So I can set my car's brand equal to Ford. I can set my car's model equal to Mustang, and I can set my car's max speed to 250. And then I can do something with those items. I can, if I just do something as simple as doing a console.writeLine, and then we'll do console.read, just so that we put in a break there so that you can see it. Just make that a write. Run the debug, and you can see it output my car's brand right there. Now, for the assignment that we have this week and for this week's work, you don't really have to go too in depth as to what a class is and what an object is, but the book did touch on it this week, so I wanted to start the process of talking about this. So kind of take this, file it away in the back of your brain for later, and we'll be circling around to this in a couple of weeks. The next topic that we're going to cover tonight is operators, and using operators in C# to do basic arithmetic. Let me go ahead and clear out some of this stuff. And just as you would expect, the basic operators are exactly what they are on the keyboard. To do addition, you use the plus sign. To do subtraction, you use the minus sign. To do multiplication, you use the star key, which is Shift 8. To do division, you do the /, which is that one right there. It is not that one, so just keep that in mind. That is the division symbol. And there are other ones as well. One operator that we've already talked about that I didn't actually tell you what it was called is the assignment operator. And the assignment operator is the equal sign. So if I were to create a new integer variable, let's call it my variable, and I want to assign a value to it, I use the assignment operator, say my var equals 5. And now I've assigned the value of 5 to my variable. We could also use, let's say, the addition operator in here as well. I could assign 5 plus 7 to that as well. You did see me, I went back and I added a space there. Technically, you don't need it. C# will know what you're talking about there. It's just a habit of mine for readability that I put spaces in between numbers and the operators. But so that's how we do simple math. My variable equals 5 plus 7. If I throw a console.write line in here, or console.write, and we send my variable out to the screen, you will see that it outputs 12, which is 5 plus 7. Your book also lists a operator. If you look at page 93, it's got the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division operators, but it also has something called the modulus operator. It's not something that's used very often. Basically what it does is it does division and then takes whatever the remainder is in an integer value and puts that and returns that. So your book gives an example of 67 modulus 3, and if we were to do the math on that, 67 divided by 3 is 6 with a remainder of 1. So if I actually run that, you'll see it returns the remainder of 1. I'm sorry, that 67 divided by 3 is 22 with a remainder of 1. Sorry. So that's how the modulus operator works. Again, it's not something that you're going to use very often, but it is there. You can also do the same math without using an integer. So if we used a double value in the place of an integer, and we did 67, and we just said divided by 3, and we ran that, you'll see, oops, sorry, I did that wrong. Okay, when I did the put this in here, I forgot. When you do this math, you use the division symbol, it's going to assume that that's an integer value. I actually have to do something that's called a cast to cast the result of 67 divided by 3 into my double variable there. Run that, and that gives me the 22.3 repeating. So that's how you would do, because this is actually represented as an integer, and an integer divided by an integer is always going to be an integer unless we actually cast it to something else. So that's what this is doing here. It's saying take the results of this and treat it as a double type and put it into that variable. Now when we start talking about strings, things behave slightly differently. So if we were to use a string here as my variable, and let's say we wanted to take two strings and put them together as one. We can do that. We can just use that with a simple addition. So we can say this is plus my string, and that will return this sentence concatenated together. So you can see this is my string. So when you add strings together, what you get is it basically just does a straight up just and. It says this string and this string and adds it together. Now notice I did put an extra space in there because it is literal. It takes exactly what's between those two quotation marks and puts it together with exactly what's between those two quotation marks. So if I didn't put that space there and I run this, you'll see that it comes up and it does that. It takes exactly what was in between those two quotation marks and puts it right next to what else is in between those two, or what's in between the other two quotation marks. And you can also experiment with this. The only operator that you can really use with strings is the plus sign. If I were to try to put in a minus sign there, you can see it's going to give me the red squiggly line. Red squiggly line in Visual Studio means that this code will not compile, and it's saying that the negative operator or minus operator cannot be applied to type string and string. So keep that in mind. I don't know why you'd ever really want to do that, but the addition operator is the only one that you can use with strings. The next type of operator that we're going to talk about is the incremental and decremental operators. Let's go ahead and turn this back to an integer value. Get rid of this. If I were to set this variable equal to 1, so I'm going to initialize my variable by setting it as I'm declaring it to equal to 1, I can use a special type of operator called the incremental operator that allows me to add 1 to that value. So if I say my variable plus plus, what that's going to do is it's going to take the number 1 and it's just going to add 1 to it. And I can do that over and over again, and it's just going to add a 1 every time. Oops. So you can see when I run this, my variable is now 4 because we started at 1, added 1 so it was at 2, added 1 so it was at 3, and then added 1 so that it was at 4. You can also do the same thing with subtraction. I can subtract the same way, just using a minus minus. Run that program and we end up with -2. So we started at 1, subtracted 1, got us at 0, subtracted another one, got us at -1, and subtracted another one that got us to -2. Now, the increment and decrement operators, you will see occasionally. You can put them on both sides of the variable. You will occasionally see this. That is something that basically what happens is it's adding 1 before it stores the variable, and that's a little complex to grasp when we're talking about such a simple concept as just adding 1, because really if I were to do this 3 times, you'll see our result is going to be the same. See, we still have a 4. There are times when you want to do this, and when we get into start talking about loops and controlling loops, that's going to be more important. But for now, just know that this can be done and this is acceptable, but for the most part, you're always going to use my variable plus plus. And once we get into loops and loop control, I can go a little bit more into detail about how and when this actually is adding 1 to the variable and why it's important to be able to do it both ways. But for now, like I said, just know that it can be done both ways. The final thing we're going to talk about as far as operators go is talking about the compound operators. Compound operators allow you to do very similar things to the incremental and decremental operators, just with other numbers. The most common compound operator that you'll see is plus equals. And really all plus equals is doing is it's saving you a few keystrokes. If I wanted to, say, add 5 to my variable, I could type my variable equals my variable, which as right now it's currently set to 1 plus 5, and when I run that, that should return a 6. C# has a shortcut for doing that. I can say my variable plus equals 5, and when I run that, I still get a 6. Basically, all the plus equal does is it says take the existing variable and add whatever I put on the right hand side of that variable. So if I were to put 99 here, it's going to add 99 to it, and you'll see we come up with 100. Again, just to point out, this can be used with other types. I can set a variable of 1.5 and plus equals 0.5 to it, and you can see we turn out with 2. That was probably a bad example. Let's add 4.67 to that instead, and you can see it still comes out as a double value. The other thing that plus equal can be used with is strings, and this becomes very, very handy. So let's just equals this, and then we can do a plus equals space is, plus equals my string. And let's see what that outputs. As you can see, it combines all those strings together in the one variable. So at the end, my variable is equal to this is my string. There is another very, very handy tool for doing something very similar to this. It is called the string builder class, and that is something that we will get into later on in class. So if you're out there sitting there going, oh well, that would be easy to do a string builder, you're right, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Also, it's important to note that there are different types of compound variables, or compound operators, excuse me. So if I set an integer of 5 here, I can do my var minus equals 3, and I can also do my var multiplied equals 5, and do some other cool tricks like that. Run that, and you can see, oh, there we go, we get 10. You can also do that with division and modulus as well, but they work exactly the same, so we're not going to go into that. The last topic in your book, in chapter 2, starts talking about formatting strings and using some different characters to actually change the output of what a number looks like inside of a string. For now, you can skip over that. It's a little bit more complex than they make it in the book. I'm not exactly sure why they're going over it in this chapter, and there are much better places for us to cover this, so we'll cover it later on in the class. So the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at how assignment 2 applies to what we've been learning. So in assignment 2, we're going to create a grade calculator. And in the grade calculator, what I'm asking you to do is take 5 different number values, add them together, and then average them. and then I want you to display back to the screen the username, which I asked you to have it read in, and then then display the average. The average should be just take all 5 grades, add them up, and divide them by 5, and that should get you your average. There's several different ways that you can complete this assignment, but a few things that I want to make clear. I am going to be looking to make sure that you're using variables in this assignment, that you're not just reading things in and doing things without using any variables. So for example, I'm sure you're going to need a variable for the student name, you're going to need a variable or variables for the grades, and then you're going to need a variable for the average. You can use our compound operators in this assignment. So if you want to use one variable for all the grades and just add them up using that compound operator, you can do that. That should be fairly easy to figure out how to do. Remember that reading things in from the command line, so if I create a, let's see, a string for name, and I do a console.write and say tell the user to enter a name. To read into what the user puts into that name, I'm going to do name equals console.readline. And what that will do is it'll take all of the input that the person puts in before they hit the carriage return and save it into that name field. Now, if I was asking you to do this, enter in a number here and save it in a number variable, we're going to have to do a convert or a cast to do that. Anytime you're reading in from the console, it reads in a string. So if I want to do, well, let's just, because it's more closer to the assignment, we'll use a double, and we'll call it grades. And then I am going to say console.write enter grade. Now to read this into that variable of grades, I'm going to say grades equals, or you could also do a plus equals, either way, equals, and I'm going to use convert dot to, double console dot readline. And what that's going to do is it's going to take everything that the user puts in before the return key, attempt to convert it to a double, and save it in the grades variable. Now, normally in programming, we would have to put some sort of error catching in here, because if a user puts in like ADSF in there, your program is just going to bomb and it's going to fail. But if as long as a user puts a numeric value in there, that is going to work. Now I do want to point out that I'm doing an explicit conversion here of this string to the double value or double type. If you were to try just to cast this, if I were to do a double and then console.readline, it should throw up a little, yep, there we go, red squiggly line saying that it can't do that. It can't convert type string to double. I know I just used the word convert, the keyword convert, to do it, but you can't cast a string to a double. You have to use the convert method to do that, which is right here, convert.toDouble and then console.readline. We will get into that in a little bit more detail later on in the class, but just accept the fact that that's what you have to do right now. So for the assignment, you should end up with a screen that looks like this, where we've asked the user to enter the student name, put my name in there. We ask the student to enter 5 different grades, and then we display back to the user my name and the average of those grades. When you're done with that, zip the entire Visual Studio solution and submit it to Blackboard, and that will be all of your assignment. If you run into any problems, make sure that you use the I Need Help forum that is in Blackboard, and I'll be sure to monitor that to look for any issues. If you are posting to that, go ahead and post the code that you're using, and we can take a look at that and say, okay, this is where you have problems, or this is what you need to change around. Also keep in mind that I do give extra credit for doing this in a unique way. So if you decide to use an advanced concept like a loop or something similar to that, or you add to the assignment and do more than what I'm asking for, I will take that into consideration when I'm doing the grading. But keep in mind, if you do something that is extra and it breaks your assignment and it doesn't work as planned, that could hurt you in the long run. So make sure whatever you do, that it does compile, that you can run the program, and it is working when you turn it into me. That is all for tonight. Have a good night, folks, and I'll see you next week.